So we talked about what the value of NFTs is. And what I really want to do is transition into how do we think about what is NFTs as a from a really lower level side of it. There's ways to think about it from what's possible in the realm of NFTs, and just in general, like how do we think about the definition of what they are in this common interpretations of this thing. So I want to talk with Linda, Jesse, and Marguerite about what it means for NFTs after this. And without further ado, let's welcome all three of them to chat. So thank you so much for joining us. This might be a slightly tough act to follow after John Tubador just talking about making history in the last 2 weeks. But what gets me a lot more excited is three of you get to see what's happening at the very surface level in this ecosystem, whether that's from the founder side, whether that's from the creativity side, or from the investor side. And I think this is a really great mix of perspectives that we have here. So what I want to do is start us off by just having each of you introduce yourself. And we can start with Linda. Just tell us about who you are, what you do, and how you got into the space.
Hi, I'm Linda. I started a crypto fund called Scalar Capital. We invest in all kinds of different things in crypto. I previously was at Coinbase, did a bunch of different roles there. And what got me really interested in NFTs in particular, I came in through the gaming side since I just play a lot of video games myself and I often buy like skins or just video game items. And when I stopped playing them, like all my items are just trapped in this game and like I can't do anything with them anymore going forward. So I just have like a ton of Hearthstone cards that I just like never see again. So I'm just really excited the idea of having NFTs just on the gaming side, just be able to like move these in-game assets very freely. And so that's kind of how I came into that world. And then it's been awesome to see it just flourish into so many interesting things. So yeah, high level description of me.
Amazing. Marguerite, maybe you'd like to tell us about Beyond District and Blockade.
Hi guys, I've been a creative technologist in this space since like 2013. My entry into this world was through like mining script coins with my gaming GPUs. So, and from there, just started to fall down the rabbit hole of how can we be creative with the blockchain and blockchain technology. Started out doing crypto puzzles and multimedia experiences across the internet and using different pieces of blockchain technology as experiences for people. That led to me founding Blockade Games in early, like January 2018, where we focus on NFTs as being a tool for the gaming experience. And so that's kind of where we've been focusing. And when we talk about what are all the potential use cases of NFTs, that's something that we think deeply about.
Amazing.
Hi, I'm Jesse. I'm the founder of Variant, which is a investment firm. And I first got started in the space as a founder in 2014. The project was called Media Chain, and I think a lot of the ideas around NFTs are ideas that we were sort of exploring back then, about 7 years too early. But our goal was to like build what we described as a universal media library where all the world's images, videos, songs, game assets, et cetera, could all be discoverable in a public ledger in the same way, you know, Bitcoin is discoverable and attributable to its owner. So got into the space through that and have been, you know, really, really excited to see all these ideas coming to fruition now.
Excellent. So I was hoping that you would bring up Media Chain, so I didn't have to ask specifically, but it's interesting because you pointed out the timing thing. And I think what's been interesting is that we've finally gone to the place where the infrastructure side is getting more and more ready so that people don't have to worry about what's happening behind the scenes. And they only have to think about, does this click with me as an idea or as a concept? And we've seen an explosion of that in the past 2 months, for lack of a better condensation of that. But what I kind of really want to get into is there are obviously a few ways to think about what NFTs are, and I think the public perception of what NFTs are or can be is slightly different because it's not as up to date on what we think, I guess, where the space is moving forward. So maybe a broad question I want to ask, and this is for anybody here, is how do you think about just creativity in the digital world? Like, do we need to change what the definition of art is? Right now, NFTs are sort of analogous to just thinking about digital paintings, but that's not it. So what changes when we look at digital art?
I can take a stab. So I mean, yeah, I think like I think what you're referring to is like there's this like sort of classical notion of what what is or isn't art, which is also like a funny like thing to define, because I think the art world itself is always trying to wrestle with this and always trying to push the boundaries. But when like NFTs start to call themselves art, the art world is somehow a lot of people in the art world are somehow trying to argue that no, that's impossible. Like that stuff can't be art. So like the art world's always wrestled with this. Like Duchamp's famous urinal was like a statement about what can and can't be art, and we're always pushing the bounds of that. And I think that certainly NFTs are making the internet and internet culture into collectible culture, and then I think it's like in the what is art is really just in the eye of the beholder. It's like I don't think it can be defined universally.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And then at the same time, like I think the stuff that's exciting happening in crypto is the idea of groups of people from all over the world can form these organizations and collectively create art together. It doesn't have to be a single artist. They can collectively own art as well together. So that part really excites me. And it just, the idea of like programmable art just is really fascinating to me. And I think that that's a design space that is going to be explored a lot within the next year or so. And so it just feels like more collaborative and dynamic, but I feel like you can't really define what art is because it's whatever people value it themselves.
So I have to agree with the programmable art, because I think one thing, so as a fine artist myself, I have a fine art degree. I was a gallery director and curator prior to really going into the blockchain space. But I really have, like, it's okay if you're just experimenting and you're a digital artist and you want to maybe make your first NFTs. But I think the conversation then beyond that is you really need to start thinking about how is this NFT experience bringing value to your art? And if you can't really participate in that conversation, then I think you're going to have a hard time keeping up with what is going to be considered valuable NFT art, because these people, like I think we saw Pac said recently, he's going to be on a Sotheby's auction. He does a really good job about bridging generative art or what's possible with NFTs and blurring the line between the two so that the experience is deeper than just uploading a file and pushing a button. So it opens up an opportunity for artists and especially digital artists to show a whole new level of genius that should be a part of the conversation.
That's I absolutely agree, and it was less about let's kind of question, or it was more of a philosophical kind of stance at it, and that is actually true. Like it is in the eye of the beholder, and like it's one of those things where we're getting to a much bigger surface area of like what can be considered art and how somebody can be exposed to thinking about and deciding how to value it or appreciate it. And it kind of brings me up to about 15 years ago when WordPress became the dominant platform on the open source side. And if you would ever look at WordPress's code base, they had this line on every single file, and the line was "code is poetry," and that's kind of what got the whole economy of WordPress plugins started, and that sort of is what the developers valued as an interesting perspective. And I think we're seeing that on a lot more ways, where now we're looking at visual with the binary bits. So what I want to kind of ask is, I mean, a lot of things just came up from it, from each of these answers, and it kind of just prefaces a bunch of topics I want to dig into. But maybe for Marguerite, tell us about what Neon District is, and kind of how you think about this as a game, as a metaverse. What kind of are you doing with the game, and how do you think about the future of the game?
So many things I could say. From my different experiences that I had developed as a puzzle designer, which were essentially, they got to the place of we were essentially making mini games, to the point where, I don't know if you guys remember Pineapple Arcade. It actually had a bunch of memed games that were blockchain themed, and they were games in arcade consoles or cabinets. So the vision for Neon District was, how do we come up with an open economy where you can have a free-to-play gaming model, where you can have a play to earn mechanic through the gameplay that can be inclusive to people that possibly do not have crypto, as a mission to put NFTs into as many people's hands as possible with as little friction as possible, with as little blockchain knowledge as possible. That was the mission. And so we shipped the public alpha January. And we've been working on this game for about 3 months. So we have years of art content and story. And the game design itself, I think, went through multiple iterations, but it was a design in process for about 1.5 years. So what I can say, though, is that we were successful in what we aim to do, as we have people now competing for the top position on the leaderboard who have never spent $1 on the game. And that to me is very exciting. And then also gas fees are handled on the back end. We're on a layer 2. So players really do have a free to play gaming experience. And soon OpenSea is going to be rolling out the Polygon Matic support. So we'll have the same sort of market experience that all these other dApps have. But the side of it is that this game is open to the entire world as long as you have access to a web browser. I love that NFTs can be a tool that allow people to leverage their talent and skill to participate in what will be the new global economy. And I think we will see more dApp developers explore that space.
I absolutely agree. I think this is kind of like the high level theme of how do we actually now make the assets that we own productive. And that sort of sets up the base for, if I'm learning something in the game, I want to figure out what I can do with it, whether that's combining with other games because of it's an open platform, or using that to leverage existing game mechanics, or just in general integrate that with outside world that may just be outside of the game itself. And this is kind of where I think that's a really good piece for us to kind of transition into just thinking about what NFTs mean outside of art. So Linda, you kind of talked about a handful of things on programmability and generative art and assets. I'm curious to kind of just hear from Linda first, and then from Jesse and Marguerite. What are some creative things you've seen with NFTs outside of art? Any kind of favorite or examples that you can talk about?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff happening. There's just been a lot of projects working on fractionalized ownership, which I think is really powerful, allowing people to now have access to these really valuable pieces of art, or it could be like very expensive gaming items that now everyone can like own pieces of. So there's like Niftex, Fraction.art working on that. I also think what's really cool is the idea of being able to use your NFT as collateral in DeFi. So being able to take out a loan, like let's say it represents some really valuable art or real estate or even like social capital, like you could stake someone else's time or someone else's like community and be like, hey, like I own a bunch of this, and now like, can I take out a virtual mortgage or something? So there's a lot of like cool stuff happening there. And I think, NFT-Fi is a project that's working on using as collateral. Just what's happening in like programmable NFTs. I think something that I'd like to see happen is just the idea of like artwork changing as time progresses. I think that would be really awesome to see, not just having static art, but being able to like somehow prove like ownership and visually display like how early you were in something, and not have that be like you could just buy that and then display it like later on. So I think there's like a lot of cool stuff you can play around there. And then I also there was so Kathleen Brightman, she was also working on NFT stuff really early on, and she was talking about the idea of like the importance of having ownership of in-game items and having the history behind that item be really valuable. So an example is like, let's say you're playing the game Magic and you win a tournament with this deck of cards, and now you have these cards that have won this tournament, and therefore these cards themselves, even though they might be the same as some other card, they can be more valuable just because they won a tournament. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening, and I could go on forever about that stuff.
Yeah, maybe just to riff on this last point about the deck of cards and like its history. I think one sort of interesting idea space is just the fact that the thought that every piece of media on the internet is going to have its entire history be discoverable on chain, right? And like that's kind of a new thing, because with traditional media like a JPEG file, when you copy and paste a JPEG from like Instagram to Tumblr, it loses its entire history. Like you don't know who made it, what it's about. Like you have to go reverse image search, and then it's like really noisy to figure out where it's been. And so I think that the one way I like to think about this is like media on the internet has largely been sort of like this flat two-dimensional surface. It's just whatever we can sort of see right in front of us, and trying to find where it came from is really hard. But now every piece of media is going to have this like Z axis that we can traverse and like figure out like, you know, who interacted with it, what it's about. And that's so haven't seen a whole lot of like people experimenting with that yet, and that's because we're still early and the history is not that rich. But I think it's one of the most exciting things to explore with NFTs because it's net new, enabled by the blockchains that these live on. And maybe just one other idea I'll offer up is so there's this project called Mirror, which is letting people mint essays as NFTs. And that's kind of it's interesting because it's not visual, right? It's like, why would you want to own? I think the idea of owning like a you know, piece of visual art is very intuitive for people because it maps to the idea of a painting. Also, owning like a game asset is intuitive to people because that's like a commonly understood thing from traditional games. But then like, why would you want to own an essay? And I think the answer there is like, well, essays are how like big ideas come into the world, right? So like, what if like Elon Musk's next secret master plan that he published for Tesla was published as an NFT? That would be like a really cool artifact to own, right? So I think that's the base case. But I can imagine like, you know, Jack, he just recently sold his first tweet as an NFT. I can imagine like the next Jack, the next person who's going to build something as big as Twitter, you know, publishes their hello world moment for their platform as an NFT from inception. And that's actually how they fundraise for the project that they're building. Like, so, you know, that, and when you think about what is like, you know, how would you do that? Well, maybe you do it through a blog post or an essay, right? So maybe that's actually what Mirror is doing is they're selling NFTs for essays, but they're really starting like companies, right? Like or projects. So it could go very far.
So say, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas about NFTs to enable deeper experiences. I think something worth, like I was just thinking about this morning. So Roham with Dapper Labs and that team did a really good job with this concept of moments. And basically you're taking a piece of time or an event from a celebrity or, you know, a player's, their sports history, and turning it into a moment is really an idea that can be applied to anything that is consumable content, like entertainment content. From if you think about a famous director, movie, like a series of movies, there's just basically anything can be turned into a moment. And in that same line of like the essays, when you buy an essay, it's like buying a moment of thought. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a whole, like, as we see drops as a service, if we're going to see people start to do like moments as a service for different people, like something hits a certain engagement criteria and all of a sudden, like in the same way with tweets, like, oh, maybe I should buy this tweet. So that's really interesting about where we're placing value. There's a heavy emphasis on story, which actually has me thinking about things like our virtual influencers and how we're going to be blending the two worlds between physical and digital. If you're familiar with, I was telling the other day to Linda about the Code Miko. She is so incredible with what she does with her virtual skins that she produces and then does live streams. She changed them in real time. I just saw her take out a flaming blade in the middle of one of her streams, and she has multiple camera points. It's very engaging. And then the audience can be typing, and you'll see their words going across her chest. And so, like, how is that monetized? Is she monetizing that? I'm really curious about all the different use cases there NFTs directly have a fit for. And then additionally, that idea, scaling it to event-based experiences, so tokenized, like you could have tokenized like a swag from your favorite musical artist, go to a concert, And maybe even the musician has like a tokenized, like it's basically a cold storage device that has an NFT in it with Bluetooth and location tracking. And then now we all have an augmented reality like phone where we can be interacting with each other, and who has it. We can receive airdrops on location from the different vendors and artists. Moments of the performance are now being dropped into my wallet that's with me. These kinds of gamified experiences. Well, and also like extend that further. Let's say I own skins like of the performance, so like I could change the backdrop that the artist has, and you see the big what's being displayed, and I've changed their environment. Maybe I've introduced a monster on stage. You can that can go both for like musical production all the way to improv theater, and what that now your actors have to change what they're doing based on what the audience is putting in their hands. These I definitely think in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to see this prototyping, and I say that because I'm going to do it.
That's amazing. It's an interesting topic though, because I think you're talking about basically having a whole set of tools and accessories to engage with your existing audience. And sort of what's interesting to me here is that, Jesse, your fund's thesis is on the ownership economy. Obviously, there's a lot of things in that category, but we're curious to kind of hear more about what does ownership economy mean to you, and sort of how do you think NFTs just kind of overlaps with that and where things are headed from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I guess, yeah, the ownership economy idea is that crypto has sort of like unlocked this new economic model for building networks that are operated and owned by their users. So like this is sort of the lens through which I look at all of crypto. Like Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think, are the first early examples of networks where there's no multi-billion-dollar networks. There's no company. They're networks that were built by a community of independent developers who then operate, ran the software on their computers and mine the networks, and in return for their contributions earned an ownership stake in the network through a token. And that the idea is that same economic model is going to find its way into every piece of consumer software on the internet, and we're sort of starting to see that happen in DeFi. And I think NFTs are sort of another example where NFTs, make the whole internet ownable, right? It's not just the platforms, but it's actually the media itself. And when you think about that, I think it has pretty profound implications in that it sort of like inverts the way social media platforms work today, where like when you upload a file to Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you're copy pasting the file to their server. And you also copy paste ownership of the media to them in that you sign the terms of service that allow them to monetize that however they see fit. And so effectively, like you're just giving away the ownership, whereas NFTs allow you to retain that ownership and for anyone to discover that it's yours in the same way, your Bitcoin is yours, which is, verifiably the case without depending on any third-party platform. So NFTs really invert the ownership model of media on the internet. And I think it's an important or sort of like formative inflection point for a lot of people who are new to the space, because it's a very easy way to understand, oh, I can actually own digital property that's truly mine. And I think it's only one hop to go from there to the idea, well, I can actually own a piece of all the internet products and services I use every day, which is something, people in the Ethereum community understand very well, because that's what's at the core of the success of, networks like Ethereum and Bitcoin. So that's the ownership economy in a nutshell. And I think NFTs are a really exciting like accelerant for the idea.
That's amazing. I forgot to mention this a bit early, but we're getting a lot of nodding heads, so to speak, on our chat. So if you have any questions as the audience you want to ask, want me to ask our panelists, please just type them up in the chat and I'll relay those questions here directly. So should have mentioned this a lot earlier, but we're happy to take any questions as well as we're going through this. I think, Jesse, what you talked about makes a pretty good, or kind of sets up a pretty good base for like how people should think about as individuals. But obviously, if you were to kind of extrapolate from that, there's a concept, or there's a way to kind of generalize that and think about communities at scale. And this is sort of what I want to ask Linda about DAOs. You recently wrote a blog post about what DAOs are and the future of DAOs and how they're interacting with a lot of different parts of our ecosystem, whether that's DeFi or NFTs. For those in the audience, we'd love for you to just kind of go over a little bit about what DAOs are and how are you seeing creative use cases of DAOs, whether it's NFTs or DeFi or just what you would even like to see.
Yeah, I do feel like DAOs are a natural progression of what's happening in crypto. And so DAO is just basically a group of people where there's no central management telling everyone what to do, like in a traditional corporation. And they organize themselves around a set of rules that are completely transparent and enforced on a blockchain. And like if you have funds managed by the DAO, it's all via smart contracts and you can see where funds are moving to and from. So it just makes things a lot more transparent and accessible. And I think just with DAOs and NFTs, there's like the first progression, I think, is you're seeing DAOs themselves invest in NFTs. So you're seeing like a Flamingo DAO investing directly in NFT art and owning that. You're seeing like a Yield Guild Games own like virtual land in the games they're playing and then like actually building it up like virtual real estate. So I think that's like the start. And I love the idea of people collectively owning this. And I think what's cool about DAOs is you can be completely anonymous too. Like you couldn't join a company, a traditional company in Silicon Valley and just be like anonymous and like never reveal your identity. But like you can join a DAO, like no one knows who you are. And as long as you like build up a reputation and you actually contribute, like everyone treats you just as any other member. And I love that piece to it. And so I think we're gonna maybe have the concept of like DAOs issuing NFTs to their members to have like badges or identity or reputation that they can have tied to their address. And maybe that could even carry on to like other places like, hey, I'm a really high profile reputation in this DAO, and like I think I can contribute a lot here, but no one knows who I am except for my reputation. So I think there's like a lot of cool things with NFT issuance. And then I also just really want to see like collective art created by DAOs. So people being able to vote on parameters of art and just create art as a group and have it be constantly changing. I was part of a DAO that was kind of working on something similar to that. It was called Saint Fame DAO. And like you would vote on like what the designs were for these clothing items, and like everyone would be like voting on different aspects to it, and then the DAO itself would produce and sell this. So I think it's like really cool. You could create like digital and physical items here, and MetaFactory is an example of a DAO that's kind of bringing together this culture and then actually making clothing items people can wear. So I think there's like so much interesting stuff happening in the DAO space, and we're just at the start of experimenting with that.
Yeah, I feel like if I were to ask you follow-up questions, we'll end up using the whole chat for just exploring the possibilities. So maybe the action item here is for all the hackers watching. We need a Twitch Plays Mona Lisa for this hackathon, and we'll see what comes out of it at scale. I think the ownership economy, the DAOs in general, and kind of how they're letting communities operate is definitely the natural progression of how do you get more people involved. I think what's another interesting piece here is we're seeing personal and social tokens also thrive. And Marguerite, I know you have a personal token called Coin. And for our audience, I would love to for you to give an overview of like what these personal and social tokens are, how do you think about them, why you decided to create one, and sort of what it means to you and what others should be excited about in this space.
Yeah, so I use Coin. So Coin touches on a few things that we've been talking about here. I took an NFT and I said, this kind of represents me and like myself as a creator, put some story to that NFT, and then I sharded it over with NFTs. So now it's been sharded into ERC20 tokens. I did a sale to fund the Uniswap pool. I did a sale of making NFTs that were access to a crypto puzzle. So you had to own the NFT, and then it acted like token controlled access in order to be able to solve the puzzle. And the NFT itself, the artwork, actually was the starting point for the puzzle. The winners actually got together and like someone who had that NFT, they pulled them into their group and then shared the prize with everybody. But anyways, so the story, like my community has been around from just the crypto puzzle journey I've taken since, 2014, 15. And it was easy for me to have a creator token because of having an existing community. I think people like, you have to kind of have that first. Otherwise, it just trying to grow a community out of just pure value of a token is kind of backwards. You need to already have something valuable that people are like invested in on an emotional level, I believe, I think, to be more successful. But for us, like when I launched Blockade Games, I we don't have an ERC20 token for Blockade. I had always participated in the open software development world, starting with Bitcoin, and I missed having that community where everyone got to participate in some degree of building, and then people like being paid in some sort of a token, even if it's just a tip. Like it's a fun experience. So when I launched Coin, I was very clear that this should be viewed as play money. It is an experiment, and so don't come to knocking at my door expecting one moon. But it's done surprisingly well, actually. And the better it does, the more opportunity we have to turn around to our community and basically support developers who are trying to do something creative that kind of fits right into our ecosystem. We can put allocations towards those funds. So it's a really healthy feedback loop. We surprisingly have done a pretty good job not having a lot of the toxic like ERC20 token holder conversations in our Discord. I think that's another reason of having a very strong community where you already have moderators that are not even paid that drive how the conversation is going to go. So like Blockade Games does accept coin in game. So that's another path. And then also there's ways like we reward these types of people. Like if it's a whole nother level of having a committed user essentially. And we can target, so for example, the game Neon District can read Ethereum wallets, Matic wallets, and custodial wallets, and then populate experiences in the game based on your asset holdings, which include coin and also the reward token cred that you get when you are a liquidity miner for coin. So we can allow people to essentially farm the database token, which is Neon. It's non-transferable, and you use Neon to funnel into your NFT development. So there's ways around on the fringe of the ecosystem that we add value. But the whole idea there is that Coin, so it's Coin's Eden, which is a syndicate within the Neon District universe and lore. We already have someone else in our community spinning up their own creator token who's a famous hacker. His name is Zayat, and he's head of security at Blizzard. He is one of the top 20 like bug bounty hunters. And so with his token, he's doing token controlled access in his Discord, where you can get really close and the inside look at as he goes and breaks things, like breaks Apple. How did he do that? And even maybe before he files his bug report, you can see like what's going on and his actual work, which I think is so fascinating. I think these guys really undersell. He's like, no, people don't really think this is so cool. And I'm like, no, this is so cool. So anyways, in the Neon District universe, Zaya is now going to have his hacker den and his community that he does have a following because he's a talent himself. And we can build up that lore around himself as well and his game characters. And he has this token that we can also, he can have his own micro economy within the Neon District universe. We could accept it at Blockade Games to funnel into their cooperative efforts. They act as a team. They go and take down other teams on the leaderboard as a group. So anyways, I get really excited about tokens as tools and communities, especially when it's coming from a good place and a sincere place.
That's so cool. This actually is a pretty good time for me to ask you. There's a question from the audience that came in, and people are curious about hearing what kind of websites or applications do you know right now that sort of let you experience the metaverse, like the way you would do in Snow Crash or Ready Player One. Other than obviously Neon District we just talked about, do you know any other attempts at this right now that people can check out? Any of you?
Yeah, you can check out Crypto Voxels. People have art galleries in it, and you don't need a VR headset or anything for it, although you could use it. And you just enter into different like land parcels in the game, and people have social events there, concerts. You can check out people's like NFT art hanging in the galleries, and there's also Decentraland as well. So yeah, it's like completely vibrant communities happening in these worlds.
Amazing. I think there's also a Decentraland for those of you interested to check out the world there. That's awesome. So I think one other kind of thing here is that with sort of just the way you can apply and compose these tools in ways to kind of merge anywhere from art to DeFi to transactions, it sets up a whole new world for setting up new and unique business models. I'm curious to kind of hear from Jesse and Linda first. Like, have you seen any new interesting business models for how either NFTs or DAOs or just these communities are thinking of monetizing, or what changes from a traditional sort of definition of like what we think about business models or revenue?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I guess like the business model of NFTs is not like
Right.
net new, right? Like it's like you're selling people your stuff, and that's like that's kind of like a well understood, like an artist sells their work, game developers sell, you know, in-game assets. So I think like the business model is well understood, and you could say it's a micro transaction model, like you know you buy stuff when you want it. But I think there's a lot of interesting like potential because all these assets are programmable. So, you know, one early example is like you can bake in royalties to an NFT so that the creator is able to like benefit when from revenue when it's resold. And that's kind of like that revenue stream is like a net new business model for creators. So that's kind of interesting. And then like Linda touched on earlier, like the idea that you can like fractionalize ownership of these NFTs and then give it away to your audience and or like sell pieces of it, right? Like these are just kind of different ways to monetize the work, which are interesting. But yeah, I guess I think the one important thing that I touched on earlier that maybe I can come back to here is like I think the business model of like social media platforms where we like engage with and consume media online is going to have to change because, you know, a lot of it has been ad driven in the past, and now you know there's this kind of like growing market economy around NFTs that's happening. And so I think like developers that lean into that and sort of like build on top of what is now emerging as this universal open programmable media library have this opportunity to like step into the flow of value that people are transacting in that marketplace. And that might, you know, look completely different than an ad-based model.
Yeah, I agree. I don't feel like they're like brand new models, but it is like new ways of thinking about things. Like for example, Jesse talked about like mirror and just like SA tokens and ownership over these pieces. Like that actually historically hadn't been something I thought about. Like this is actually something that I would want to own a piece of, and thinking through like what does SA token enable? And I think there's going to be so much more developed along like what these tokens can represent. And what it allows you to be part of. So I'm pretty excited by that. And then I think one area that I've been really interested in seeing more of is just the idea of so like a very common business model just in the traditional world is like selling advertising space on your website or on Google having ads or something. And I think it'd be really cool to just have like these tokenized advertising space and like virtual real estate. And so like having people just be able to like buy your advertising spot as an NFT really early on if they think your website's going to get popular, and then being able to like bake in royalties into that advertising space as people can now trade this freely. So like that idea has been around for a while, but I haven't really seen that many people work on it. So I'm excited to see that as like a maybe promising business model in the future.
That's a cool hack of an idea too for those of you looking for ideas still. It's actually kind of true because maybe I could have phrased it better. It's not really a new business model. It's just more about unlocking new ways to sort of earn or sort of generate what you would say revenue in this case. And we've seen creative things like, I mean, now looking at something like ENS domains. ENS domains are ERC 721 tokens. You are able to physically transfer ownership of domains, which is slightly different than how we think about purchasing domains in kind of the current world. You have things like people auctioning their time. We saw Ruben, one of our kind of common friends, giving out legal advice for all the token holders as an experiment as a lawyer. And that's a whole new way to think about prioritizing or being able to book a meeting because you owned the social token. And I think the mirror example is probably the best thing here that you talked about, which is unlocking thought. And that's a super unique sort of thing that we know that we've been able to express on the internet. We've been able to replicate and copy it infinitely, but we've never been able to think about valuing it in sort of this crypto first, I guess, way. So that to me is super exciting. I feel like I'm now jealous that I don't get to compete on the hackathon this weekend because I want to try some of these things. But this is so cool. We'll see if there's any more questions coming in. But
I had a couple to add. So like the advertising space, I've been telling the OpenSea team for a while, they need to have that banner position at the top where you can compete to get your collection or NFT position there. like as an NFT use case, and then like people could, yes, being able to monetize that and buy the advertisement, I think is really neat. And I like the idea of then, for example, in Universe, in Neon District, having a billboard, and the billboard could have a, just roll through NFTs that people have put on a list, whitelisted, and then it could be about events, an event in Crypto Voxel's dance party. But you can, the other thing I like about it is you could buy it like just by clicking it, and it could go into your wallet. Yeah, and I said those kinds of systems I think are neat. So I recently did a pitch deck where I made a list of accredited investors and found who they were on like through OpenSea and other means. Like for example, Mr. Beast, when he bought a punk, I knew like, okay, I got his address. And then I airdropped these pitch decks, which were unlockable. So you had the cover, but unless you owned the NFT, then owning it, you could have access to the deck. Currently it was just a link, but the idea that I think soon OpenSea will support and I think Rarible has unlockable content too, but you can upload the actual PDF too. So it could all be like one experience. I'm really excited about like unlockable content as a tool and mechanism. You could launch so many businesses just on that model.
I totally agree. It's a pretty big space because people definitely are always curious for mystery boxes. It's a natural instinct. No, this is great. So maybe what I'll do is I think we should end this here and kind of wrap up with some kind of final thoughts. There's a great set of kind of panelists here. They're investors, gamers, founders. You have really diverse backgrounds that kind of got you through where you are now. And what I want to do is kind of end off with a question for each of you. And we'll start with Marguerite. For people who are trying to get into this space, whether that's kind of creative folks who want to learn about this, or founders who are trying to start something in this ecosystem, do you have any advice that you want to give them? And kind of how should they be thinking about what they should focus on, what matters, or what they should be looking at in terms of what the possibilities are, what are interesting things to kind of dig into. We'll kind of I want to just have each of you answer that, and we'll wrap up this panel today.
I think something I've been thinking about is the dichotomy of people with a big brand wanting to come in and participate and make their NFTs, but then then you have what almost feels like a cash grab that happens. I think it would be better if people with large brands and they are just ramping up to almost go through the steps anonymously. Make a collection, don't associate it with your brand, kind of look around, spend time and seeing what is sustainable models that other people are doing, other creatives. How do they plan to support these NFTs that they're minting? Because I think you actually have a lot of responsibility as someone with a big following or a brand to make sure you're being thoughtful. Even though there's money on the table potentially, doesn't really negate that you should be thoughtful in how you're going to introduce these economic tools into your community.
Jesse, Linda, anything to add?
Yeah, so I guess my advice for founders is to be persistent, which, so having like been thinking about this stuff for a long time, I think like in hindsight, it's easy to see like it's all happening now. And then I guess the important thing to keep in mind is, we're definitely in some kind of like hype cycle for NFTs right now, where like, the whole world is excited about them, and that excitement will like wax and wane in the short term. But in the long term, like this technology is not going anywhere, and all the things we're talking about on this panel are going to happen. So yeah, my advice is like be persistent. There's going to be a sort of like hype cycle correction, and that's normal. It's happened in crypto. It happens in all markets. But just keep going, and if you're in a position where you can get to the other side, you'll be poised to succeed when the next hype cycle comes, and that'll carry you all the way through to adoption.
I think my advice, especially for NFTs or anything that involves like having a community or having to engage with the community, I think what works really well, I mean, not always the case, but generally I've seen work really well, is building in public and being really collaborative with people early on, and not just building in a complete vacuum. Like, people in the space are really welcoming, very open to feedback, and helpful with each other. So I feel like we talk about Mirror a lot, but Mirror in particular, I think, did an excellent job at building in public, having their like launches and testing like just live streamed, and really people could see the kinks that needed to be fixed, and would just kind of iterate from there. And I really like that they're now having like very public displays of like community building early on, by having like people voting in who are going to be the next writer. So I just think like building in public can really benefit you in just starting that like community building early on.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. And to kind of sum it up, I think that's primarily why also ETHGlobal exists. We want you to succeed in this space, and we want to be there to kind of help you unblock wherever you're stuck or need help with. So I think this is a really good advice for people, the 550 plus people who are going to be diving into or building something cool in the world of NFTs over the next 2 days. And with that, I want to thank all three of you for being with us today and sharing some of your amazing thoughts. There will be some more questions that we'll get, and we'll just send them your way directly, and we'll be sure to kind of connect you with anybody who definitely wants to talk with you. So thanks again, and we're super grateful to have you.
It was fun.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Kartik. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.